I'm going to talk a bit about this whole thing about how do we deal with the people side of things. I mean, everyone says, well, where do I hire these people that I need to get things done? It's a big challenge for everybody. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that area. But first of all, I wanted to talk about my little journey to get here. So let me see. I was at Netflix for quite a while. About 3 years ago, I was still at Netflix, and what I was doing then was going out and talking to people primarily about the concerns Netflix had. You know, how do we get our open source program out there? How do we explain the architecture we're doing? How do we find engineers that we want to hire? All those kinds of things. So Netflix gave me a platform that was really useful, and over several years I built up sort of a reputation as that Netflix guy. Very helpful. I moved on then to Battery Ventures about 3 years ago, VC firm. That gave me a bigger platform. That was one of the main reasons I went there. So it gave me a platform where I could travel more widely. And what they wanted me to do is go and talk to people like you, the enterprises that were doing the interesting things, and figure out if we could find anything in our startup portfolio that we could sell to them, right? And figure out where were the gaps, what was going on, and really plug into this huge revolution in IT that's been happening over the last few years. And it was good timing because that was really when this started to explode. So that gave me a bigger platform, and then what I've done in the last few weeks is moved up to arguably an even bigger platform. Battery Ventures deals with the certain parts of the market, and it deals with certain geographies, but I've just joined AWS, which is global, and it's huge, and I've just moved from working for a company with about 60 people to one that has, I don't know, 250,000 or something, and I'm sort of trying to remember people's names is my main problem that I'm trying to struggle with right now. And I want to say a bit about what I'm doing there and why that really involves you people, really everyone here. My role is really to continue the discussions I've been having and to go and talk to executives and talk to developers and figure out what's going on in the architecture, particularly the cloud-native architecture. And to kind of drill that down a little bit, I'm very interested in companies who are at the bleeding edge using everything that AWS builds, and people that are trying to, particularly people that are trying to build their own open source. So if you've got your own open source program and you're open sourcing things, that's actually a pretty good indicator that you're really into this. You're all in, you're trying to figure it out, and you realize that building and sharing open source is actually a key thing that enterprises do now. And I think actually Disney started doing open source in a big way a few weeks ago. So, you know, we've got lots of examples now where lots of people now have GitHub accounts, and that's one of the, and so what I'm interested in is how AWS should interact with the open source that our customers are building. A lot of it is, like Netflix OSS is all about how to use Netflix how to use AWS in the first place. So that's what I'm interested in, and if we have some time at the end, maybe we'll get to a bit of Q&A, but certainly anyone who wants to talk to me about this, you can either reach out to me in person or reach out, if you're an AWS customer, then you can reach out through your AWS contacts and they'll know how to find me. So that's what I've been doing. So what have you guys been doing? Well, there's really four things. There's this people journey of getting to DevOps, right? You're going from whatever it was before, these siloed organizations, to this integrated cellular organization where the development and operations is integrated or is working very closely together. So that's the first change. But that's the people. When you get to do that, then you find that having these DevOps teams working on a huge monolithic code base is a problem because they want these teams to have autonomy. So we end up with a software architecture which has become known as microservices. And it really is hand in glove with DevOps. It breaks things into chunks which are smaller chunks, maybe even, what one engineer does is maybe a microservice, or it's at least small enough that you can change it independently from everything else. So that gives you the next thing. So that's the second thing. You've now got an architecture for doing this, and we've got a change in way we organize people. We've got a change in the architecture for how we get things done. And I forgot what my third one was. Damn it. I have a cheat sheet here. This is what you get. Oh, yeah. The other one is this, that the best code in the world used to be stuff you went and paid a lot of money for from big vendors that spent years building it, and that's really moved to open source. The best code you can get now for doing almost everything in infrastructure, in things like artificial intelligence, the leading things that are out there are open source packages, and some of them are built by companies or partners, and some of them are built by end users and shared there. So that's a really big change. And what we've got for the fourth one, my brain has started to flag it up here. Where has it gone? All right, so yeah, of course, the fourth one is that once you've got all that together, you can't go and ask somebody for, please, can you go buy me a machine and give it to me in a few weeks. So cloud is really the fourth one, right? So we're trying to pull all these things together, and when they work together, you get to go really fast and move things along and get everything done really quickly. So given that that's where we're going, then what are we doing about the talent we need to get that done? That's really where a lot of people have problems. And there's a quote which has been copied many times that I did. I'll sort of rerun it for you. I was talking to a CIO summit, and they were saying, hey, well, this Netflix stuff's really cool, but we don't have those superstar engineers, and we can't figure out how to use it. And I look around the room at the nameplates, and I said, well, we hired them from you, right? And this has gone around quite a few times, so probably heard this before. But it's like, so what happened there? Why did these people end up at Netflix? So let's sort of drill into that a bit and see what happens when you try and get on board with these things. So Netflix has this situation that it set up an open source program partly to attract people. It's a relatively well-known firm. It's got a well-known brand. We took the time to build a technology brand so we could get people to hear about us. And then, they have enough money to pay good wages, even in the Bay Area. So there's a number of sort of things working there. But how do you deal with that? Because what happens is that, let's say you're an enterprise and you've decided to go down and do all these wonderful things, and now the conferences, they have your engineers are out at conferences, and you've open sourced some things, and now your engineers have their name on GitHub accounts. So what's the next thing that happens? Every recruiter in the world now is targeting your engineers. That's not, so what are you going to do about that? So that's kind of the crux of it. So what have you got that you can do that can keep people and continue to develop them? Because we've seen this. We've got a few examples here. Like 2 years ago when this summit happened, I think Courtney wasn't working for Starbucks, was she? So maybe her fame at appearing at the DevOps Summit has helped her there. And Ross wasn't at Verizon, he was at Target. So you've seen people move, and we're seeing developers move around as well. So being visible makes you a target. So there's a couple of things you can do about that. Netflix has a program, and Netflix has a way of handling compensation which is unique, and it's a unique advantage they have, and it's something that their HR has bought into, and trying to get your HR department to buy into this turns out to be impossible. I actually don't know anybody who has actually copied the way Netflix does compensation and the stock plan. It's totally unique. But what it does is it gives them an advantage. They do an annual mark-to-market. So if you're a regular engineer and you're working away, and that you spend a whole year working on the cloud team, and now you're a cloud engineer and you open source something, at the end of that year and they say, you're no longer regular engineer, you're now highly visible cloud engineer. And when we hire people like that, this is what we pay them. And then, so they mark you to that. And what you were on before doesn't matter. It's not relevant. Like, this is what you are currently worth. This is what we would have to pay to hire you today. Right? I don't know anyone else that does that kind of thing on an annual basis. So that might be a bit difficult to get your HR department to go like totally rework the way they run the whole business, right? Because everyone's got, I got 4%, and I got to peanut butter it across everybody and maybe give a few people 6%, right? And 2%. So that's kind of the normal thing. So how do you compete with that? So what people typically do, particularly in large organizations, there's a lot more status. Titles matter, right? In smaller organizations, there's less status, less titles. But, you get an email from somebody, and you go, I don't know who this person is. You look them up in the org chart, and you look into who do they report to, and what level are they? Are they higher than me? Do I have to listen to them? Are they above me or below me? So you get that kind of calculus. I'm sure most of you have seen that happen. Although, in enlightened organizations, obviously, you talk to everybody. But there's an element of that. So if you can take somebody and bump them up a bit and give them a title and a higher level as an individual contributor, then, they're on a higher pay grade and whatever, but there's this whole thing about how do you build individual contributor programs that you can use to maintain your key engineers. And if you think about the different kinds of people that are here, there's this book that somebody wrote, like the Phoenix Project. Have you read that one? I think it was mandatory for all Ross's team, right? So there's a character in it called Brent, right? And most people either have a Brent, or you were a Brent, or you're kind of halfway a Brent. There's bits of Brent in what I've done over the years, right? You're that, and those of you that haven't read the book for some reason, it's kind of the key employee. It's the one when the site goes down, it's the one that knows how to fix it. Or when something's blocked, they know how to unblock it. It's the person that really understands how everything works in an organization. And they are absolutely central. And everything routes through them. They become a bottleneck. That's kind of the point. That's the way it's used in the Phoenix Project. But think about what you do if that person, goes on vacation or gets sick or leaves, right? You can be really, really really screwed up from just trying to deal with that. So if you have these key employees, they are the people, it turns out, that you want to promote up a level. You want to give them the permission to say no. You want to make them important enough that people are too sort of scared to take them, stupid things that they shouldn't be doing anyway, and give them that, the management authority to push back. And then you give them the ability to look across the whole organization and become the sort of the overall architect or the overall sort of guru for how to make it better, how to fix things. And when you take them out of firefighting every single hour of the day, they're the ones with the insight that can really provide huge value. So if you lose that value, that insight, it's a much bigger loss than just the person that's trying to keep the machines from falling over. So how do you maintain a Brent? So there's a few programs that I could talk about, and there's really two ways of doing it. You can either say, well, we have directors that manage a whole bunch of people and manage managers, but we could promote somebody to be a director. And that's often called a distinguished engineer or a principal engineer. And then maybe you can go up one more level and have somebody that's really, really senior and really critical and sort of has a bit more business sense maybe, and have them at VP level and have them be called a fellow, right? And that's generally the mapping that you see. I mean, you can see variations on that. But think of a distinguished engineer as sort of an individual director and a fellow as sort of a VP level role. And you get the stock plans and the comp and whatever, so hopefully you can keep somebody that's really critical to you and develop them into being that guru that makes everything work rather than the person that's just firefighting all day. So one way of doing it is to promote people into this role. It's a management thing. Management get together and say, this person's really important. We're going to replace them with 4 people because that's how much it's going to take to replace this one person to actually get that job done. That quite often you have to break down that job into a lot of people or an entire group in order to just handle the load. And then you promote a few people, and that works quite well, I think. Once you get a decent number of these people, then there's an additional sort of wrinkle or an additional way of looking at this, which you can start to have this group of technologists act as their own kind of club, right? And let's put up a slide that I've got. When I was at Sun, somebody was saying, well, how do you become a distinguished engineer? And this was the slide I produced. And this was in around 2000, I think. So this is a 16-year-old slide. And my question to them was, so how many Ds do you know? And here's the list. If you look at this list, there's 76 people on this list. How many of these names do you recognize and know why they are distinguished? So that's your first question. Then the second question is, how many of those distinguished engineers know who you are? right? And if most of them know you, that's pretty good. And how many of them are standing outside your cube or your office waiting to talk to you on a regular basis? Right, okay, if you've got DEs lining up to talk to you, you're probably a DE. You should, that's a great sign for a nomination. And we had a few people that just went in on that basis. But let's look at this list. There's a few interesting people on this list, and as we mentioned a little bit earlier, people we can see. There's a few bits of data you can extract from this. It says fellow in brackets after, I think, 5 of these names, and chief scientist for Bill Joyce. So there's sort of 5 or 6 out of 70 that are fellow level. So looking at the ratio, I don't know if this is a good ratio or a bad ratio. And there's a few names on here. There's actually, sad to say, and I was part of trying to fix this problem, there's actually, I think, only 4 women on this list. So I'm going to actually they illustrate the mix of different people that we had on this list. Shirling Shang-Shantz. She was a Sun Labs researcher, and in 2000 or so, she was working on the security of the internet. That's pretty useful, yeah. I'm glad somebody was working on researching the security protocols in the internet, and she worked, that was her specialty area. Really, some fundamental work and things that you use today came out of stuff that she did. So that's a lab. So we had people in the labs that were distinguished engineers because they were research people. Okay, that's one case. Harriet Coverston. She was an acquisition. She was CTO of a startup doing storage. It was SAM-QFS. It was a hierarchical storage management device, and they're in Minnesota, and she came out of the whole Cray CDC space. And she's still there. She's actually now CTO of a startup again. But basically, when we acquired a company, the CTO of that company kind of got a shoe-in as a distinguished engineer, right? That was sort of part of the package that you kind of, there's a bit of checking that things made sense. So people came in on that basis. And quite a few people on this list came in like that. Let's look on this list. So Radia Perlman, okay. Spanning tree algorithms? Okay. She's now, I think she was the one that became a fellow later on at Sun, and she's now a fellow at EMC. So that's a good one. And let me see, Robin Jeffries. She's human factors, and she left Sun eventually and went to work at Google for about 7 or 8 years and is now retired. So, so that was the mix, and there's other people on here. You can probably recognize a few of the names. So we can sort of finish with a slide now, I think. So given that you've got this collection of people, let's just talk a bit about the process they use. So management initially bootstrapped this, right? Then you have a set of people that became a sort of a self-managing group for doing this. And the way it worked was roughly twice a year, all the Ds would get together. They might have a little mini conference, talk about technology, but there was a meeting. Everyone got in a room, and managers would bring in candidates, and the manager would say, this is why this candidate's very wonderful for a few minutes, 20 minutes or so. Then they'd leave the room, we'd spend 20 minutes discussing them, and then there'd be a sort of a majority vote with a few vetoes. Like if somebody said, I'll quit the company if you nominate this person, which happened once, I think. It's like, okay, severe allergic reactions were a thing to watch out for. But the other time, people just nobody knew them, right? So you had to socialize your candidate, had to be well known, right, to this group. So that was the process, and it was sort of the Ds got to know each other as sort of a peer group, and there were a few events where they got together. So that's one way you can build some cohesion around this, and you can see the kind of people that were at Sun. But you have people that will one day be famous if you get them into these roles, right? And these are the people that go out and talk about stuff, but they come back and you've bound them into the organization by giving them a lot of seniority. So, should you go and set up a program like this? Well, there's downsides. Have you heard of there was a bunch of manager stereotypes, and one of them sort of is apt to here, the seagull manager. Have you heard of that one? Flies in, shits all over everything, and flies out again. So apologies for the language, but it's appropriate. So, that was the job. Occasionally the only time you'd see a DE when they come in and tell you were doing your project all wrong and disappear again, and it's not that helpful. So some people go, you have to watch out for that reputation. The other thing you can have is, so let's say when you put somebody up for nomination, right? So you have to be really careful how you do that, because if you let them know that you're doing it, fine. And if they're a shoo-in, fine. But if they don't get it, right? What happens if they aren't nominated for any reason? They might be a perfectly good, developer or whatever that has aspirations or is very ambitious, and they talk you into putting them up and they weren't really ready for it. Very often, people that didn't make the grade, that were turned down, would just leave. Right, so this can be very counterproductive if you oversell the ability to get in. So they tried to, in theory, make it something where the manager did all the work and the employee wasn't really supposed to know they were being nominated. And of course, they kind of knew, because it's pretty hard to keep it quiet if you're writing up a whole dossier of what they did. So that's a couple of things to think about. And I think that there's an us and them kind of thing that you can get into. This is something that happens with research labs as well. If you have a group in a research lab, you can kind of get, well, what am I? I want to do cool stuff too. So it's actually one of the things that happened. I got the title of distinguished engineer when I went to eBay as well. But when I joined Netflix, there wasn't any distinguished engineer level. I was a director level manager and managed a team of people. And everybody was expected to be like you were working in a research lab. And everybody was expected to be distinguished. And then the mark-to-market meant that they didn't have to give you a title. You could just be and they had very few titles. There was just like senior software engineer, manager, director, and VP. There wasn't sort of various graduations of it. So rather than having title inflation, they could just, pay you what you were worth. And that model is something that I think is somewhat hard to replicate for a lot of large companies. But if you're a startup, I would go with something like that. And study the Netflix culture deck. There's a lot of detail there on the stock plan, which I won't go into. It's very complicated. But I want to come back to one thing, which is that a lot of the time we say, these are the things we want to do. And everyone agrees these would be great things to do. And then we give people financial incentives to do the opposite, right? We should be doing really long-term strategic thinking, but I'm going to pay you based on the results of what you do this month, right? And this is pervasive. And I've got a little anecdote here. I recently joined the board of a company, and I went on a training class on how to be a board member. Some people think being on boards is really boring, but for some reason I'm quite enjoying it. The training class was interesting, a few days of hanging out with board members of companies, and they had a class, and there were two talks back to back that really kind of jarred with me in some sense. The first talk was about strategy, like this is how your board should be influencing your company with strategy, how you should be telling the executives to do things, and all the examples were Netflix this and Amazon that, and a few other companies, but how they were able to do long-term strategic thinking, and that was a good thing. Okay, so that was fine. We agreed with that. The next talk was on compensation. And this is the best practices for compensation, and it was all in short-term incentives. And I kind of put up my hand and said, Netflix and Amazon, the way they compensate people is all long-term incentives. There's no bonus scheme at Netflix. Pretty much everyone at Amazon is paid in stock, and you have to wait for the stock to be worth something. As the stock price changes, nobody at AWS or Netflix's pay changes. Whereas a lot of companies, executive compensation is tied to the stock price. So it's incredibly counterproductive thing. So this is at the root. I don't know how to fix this, but this is at the root of a lot of the problems with large-scale industry. Right, with enterprises, as you're incenting people to act in short-term ways, and we're trying to go out there and sell technologies and ideas, and this would be better, and long-term things. Yeah, I had another metric, which was from experience at Sun, where it took a long time to build hardware projects, and you'd be saying, we're going to build a new chip, and it's going to be the fastest chip, and we build a machine around the chip. It was about 5 to 7 years to go through that cycle. The trouble is that you get a new VP about every 3 years. So the problem is the person launching the product hates this product because it's not his product, right? Their product. It's the product from 2 people ago. So they would try and kill it off and get their project funded. And we get this long sort of chain. So I called it mean time between vice presidents should be longer than your project duration. Right? So if you're working on a 3-year project, you want people to stick around for it. Anything long, but Netflix, the VP was there for about 7 years. I think they're still there. A lot of the management have been there for a very long time, and most of the projects were a few weeks. Right? That's the right way around. So this is part of getting everything done in small chunks and not having these enormous death march projects which will be killed before they actually deliver. So that's probably enough anecdotes. I'm going to pause there, and maybe if anyone has any questions or observations or different ways of doing things that they've seen work. Any questions? Or we can just get to a bit more, or get the Disney movie up a little quicker if you like. I don't know, those of you, there was Buzz Lightyear in a custom video 2 years ago, just letting you know. This is, I'm expecting to see Buzz Lightyear up here. Okay?
15 seconds. Announce a question, otherwise 50 seconds.
Can we go on one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, the vacation policy. So the question was, well, it was a statement really that Netflix was one of the first companies to introduce unlimited vacation. I think actually IBM does that. Or there's quite a few companies that do this now. And there was a couple of things about that. It was mostly that it was just, there's another principle at Netflix which I ended up calling conservation of management attention span. It's like, if you don't have to think about recording where your people are and how many days of vacation they have, there's one less thing to think about. You can think more about the product you're trying to build, right? And this is another thing the cloud does, is I'm no longer doing capacity planning meetings. I'm no longer arguing with sales reps over what I'm going to buy. I'm downloading stuff my engineers are getting stuff off GitHub. So in that world, you're taking friction out, but you're also taking out things that aren't adding value that are giving you back more management time. And when the managers have more time to think, they do make better decisions, they hire better people, they do better technical architecture stuff. So that it's one of those things where let's just forget about it. There is a financial issue around when you do this, it means that there's some minor financial benefit to the company because you're not holding this unused vacation on the books. But part of the issue here is that your management have to model going on vacation, and they do, right? So you have to pick when you want to go, but basically it's up to that. And they now have unlimited maternity leave, I think, as well, and a few other people have got better at that. So these are things that are mostly about simplifying things and giving back control to the employees. That's sort of the management principle. It's a systems thinking approach. You can make people responsible. You hire fully formed adults. There's really no junior people at Netflix. So this isn't a thing that you can replicate into any enterprise. You can maybe do a startup and build a company this way, but it's very hard to replicate. And that's one of the things that will always make Netflix into a special company that's able to do things that it's very hard for other people to do. But what I found in the last 3 years of talking to people is that there's quite a lot we can learn and apply across many enterprises. And I've been talking to a lot of you. I know I've spoken to a bunch of you already over the last few years, and I can carry on doing that in the next few years.
By the way, Adrian, could you repeat the question?
I did repeat the question.
One more time. All right. What was the question?
The question was about unlimited vacation.
Unlimited vacation time. All right. 90 seconds. 10 seconds to ask one more question.
They want Buzz Lightyear.
Buzz Lightyear. All right. Everyone, thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers.